Hello again, and a very warm welcome to Sweet Omagh Town Internet Radio. It's been a while since we spoke to you, and it's good to be in your company again. And in the company of our co-presenter, Declan Ford.
Isn't it great to be back?
Where did we go?
Yeah, well, we're back for a while, and a while, as the great Tommy Sands would say. And a little delve into the rattlebag of oral history.
Yes.
And interviews over the years.
Yeah. Well, I've one that I like to put out over Christmas.
Right.
And it's about school life, early school life in the Christian Brothers. And those who would have went to Mother Oliver's or the primary convent, I suppose, and then up into the manual room at the Christian Brothers.
Well, you know that even though I was reared in Newry, in County Down, I went to Mother Oliver's class. Was my first school was in Omagh. And my sole memory of Mother Oliver was, I have in the back of my head, a rocking horse and a sand pit.
I remember the rocking horse, because I went to Mother Oliver's as well. Then I went up to the Christian Brothers, to Brother Doyle.
Right.
And thank the good Lord, my folks moved out to Arvilley, and then we sort of emigrated over to Convent Primary.
Right.
Which was a whole new experience, because you could bring your toys to school, you could bring your gun to school.
That would set you up well for the 1960s.
Oh,
here.
very well. That's it. Good training ground, yeah.
I must tell you, talking about Christmas, I remember and toys, one Christmas getting a little revolver, and it had, I can still see it in my mind's eye, it had a kind of a curved handle, you know, like a blunderbuss, or a derringer, and I was playing with my elder brother, and he shot at me with a cap. Remember caps?
Yes, God, I do. Yeah,
you know
very
that.
well. Yeah.
And the actual barrel of the gun fell out. It was as though it would have been shot.
Do you remember Parade guns?
Oh yes, Spud Guns.
Spud guns, yeah.
And water pistols.
Ah, great.
And the Spud Guns are like them, you know, and they were quite revolting, you know. The potatoes would go bad and that, you know. Then you had the remnants of all kinds of guns inside the gun. They were like, it was like a metal thing that just slotted in, and the air just pushed it out.
Then you would have got cork guns as well. You put the little cork in, and you crank the spring.
Right.
And then it shot the cork out as well.
I remember I once got a rifle, and it had white plastic butt and filigree chrome and a black barrel, and at the end of the black barrel where the sight should have been, there was a little red tip. And I went round, I remember going round an entire Christmas Day and Boxing Day looking for engines in the snow. And I was convinced that I was a trapper.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing, you know, what world the imagination can open.
I remember that when I always wanted a cowboy suit when I was about 4 or 5 years of age. And Sandy didn't bring me the cowboy suit. But Charlie, our neighbour across the street from us, got this black cowboy suit with the hat and stirrups, the whole lot.
And did he have the waistcoat with all the fancy trimming on it?
Absolutely, and the little
And wee tassels round the hat?
Exactly,
yes.
yeah.
Well then, when I lived in Newry, I got a pair of chaps. Now, I think these were kind of plastic chaps. So I would wear these and go to the mart in Newry, and I would sit and watch the cows being sold and that, and I was convinced I was in some corral.
Correct.
You know, in a ranch.
Chewing tobacco or something, yeah.
Chewing tobacco and spitting, you were looking for a spittoon. Oh.
But,
Innocent times.
Oh, God. But I remember talking to a friend of mine many years later, and I was telling Tommy this, and he was saying that must be around the same year, he wanted a cowboy suit, he says, and a cowboy suit landed, he says, but there was four brothers in the house. He says, one of them got the waistcoat, the other guy got the trousers, the other guy got the hat, and one of them got the gun. So they had a cowboy suit, but they had to share. But they also got an annual, right? One of these Beano annuals, or dandy annual, whatever the word at the time. And he didn't want to loan it to his brother, but the mother and father made him. So he says, you can read the annual, but you can't laugh at the jokes.
Yeah. Well, I remember it must have been probably in the late 50s, the early 60s, when Davy Crockett, you know, the king of the wild frontier, when Davy Crockett was on the go, it was Fess Parker played him in the Disney film, and there was a craze for raccoon skin hats with the wee kind of like a weasel's tail.
That's right.
I
Yes.
used to have one of them.
Oh my God.
I would walk around proudly, and then I had a belt that was an elastic belt, but the buckle was a snake in the shape of a nest shape.
God, you had a
And I
charm.
would stand and stare at this for weeks on end, just hoping that Santi would bring it to me.
Anyway,
right.
it's Christmas. Any plans, Mr. Ford, or what do you tend to do yourself? Or?
Well, I think like everybody else, I'll be having the wine and cheese, of course, on the patio, like the great and the good. I'm sure, like yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But it'll be a work meeting. It'll not be no pleasure.
No, it'll be like Tommy's annual. We'll read the book, but we won't laugh.
Yes. Just talking about annuals, my late Aunt Eilish once bought me an annual for Christmas. And I just could not. She was telling me about this great annual she had, and I was about maybe 9 or 10 years of age. And eventually, she gave me the annual, and you know what it was? The People's Friend. Oh, but I used to love the Dandy and the Beano,
Yes.
and I was very partial to the Bash Street Kids, in particular Plug.
Desperate Dan. He was in Beano, wasn't he? Right?
No, he was Dandy.
Was he?
He was Dandy.
Right.
He lived in Dry Gulch, and he ate cow pie.
Ooh, yeah.
And then the Bash Street Kids, I think, might have been the Beano. Dennis the Menace was the Beano.
Ah, Dennis the Menace. Remember
Dennis
him?
the
Yeah.
Menace, you know. And as I say, there was Beryl the Pearl, Minnie the Minx. And there was then also, in one of the comics, there was a black and white sheepdog. It might have been the Valiant or the Hotspur.
Oh, no. I can't remember that, Declan. now,
Can
so-
you not?
Nope. No.
And then there was some kind of Neanderthal man who had a clicky bat, which was a cricket bat, which he would get rid of all and sundry villains with his clicky bat. And I think he had a pet mongoose.
Every home should have one. Yeah. Right. Look, this will be a story. This is a story we recorded, or an interview we recorded back about 1992 or thereabouts, from a gentleman in Omagh, or originally from Omagh, who I think he was out in Illinois, this guy. He's a guy called Walter Maguire.
For I recollect he was back visiting his mother in O'Kane Park.
We think
or
O'Kane Park,
Cannondale?
we're not sure.
Yeah.
Now, we don't even have a photograph of him. We don't have access to any of his family relatives because it's. We went chasing these, and obviously we've ran a few blanks. He has a sister, we believe, lives in Belfast called Nancy. Can't get an address for her. Possibly a brother somewhere in England as well, and probably himself still in. I think he's a professor in Illinois or somewhere. I'm not sure. He went to Queen's University, but he went through Muller Oliver's, and he tells a nice story of the primary school and the life. And you have to remember, he talks about Brook Street and Castle Street and stuff from the perspective of a very small young boy.
That's right.
And he expresses his concerns and his fears about walking down alleyways and various things at that time. So it's no reflection on the good people of the town, but he was afraid, I suppose.
It's as a child saw
Yeah.
them, and
Yes.
he's just a child again,
Yes,
and it's innocent,
it is.
and it also shows you the way that a child's mind works, you know. So
Yes,
he was a great speaker.
Lovely guy, lovely
Told
guy.
lovely stories just about the life and times of a schoolboy, and there's maybe one or two surprises in it.
There is indeed. There's a nice story if you listen to the very end. And if it strikes a chord with you, please feel free to share it on Facebook or the internet or YouTube or whatever format you read it on, because it's been a few months since we've been on the air, Declan, and I'm sure a lot of people have forgot what we even do or what we do. But we're back on now for a while, I
For a
suppose.
while, yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully.
Back to bring joy to the world that is keeping one step ahead of COVID,
Yes.
like ourselves.
Just to make ourselves is right. We just... What do you say about COVID? I mean, we've said it all, we've done it all, and people are trying to survive.
Well, you should just knuckle down, buckle down, and get on with it. That's all we can do, you know. And you and I will live to blight another day.
I have a good phrase. Thrive, don't survive. That's it. That's
all
my
we're
motto.
gonna
That's
do.
my Christmas
A
motto.
walk-in Reader's Digest.
Okay, folks, to see you again. Have a good Christmas, and we'll be back over the coming weeks, maybe even months, who knows. Weather permitting.
We will be back when you least expect.
Yes.
Good night, God bless, and have a happy Christmas.
Same here. Bye.
I was born in 8 Railway Terrace back in 1940. Now, I was born at home, and as far as the earliest memories I have, I think going to school, and school played a great deal in my life, because there was always something frightening about it, because it meant a change of some sort, and that I had to do things that I probably didn't want to do. But I remember the Gormleys lived 2 doors up on the side of the road that we lived, and Ursula had sisters who had been to the grammar school and to the Loretto Convent, and at that time the first thing you did was you went to the convent for about a year. We were called mixed infants. We were boys and girls, and I remember being taken up to the school by my mother and Ursula Gormley, and seeing all these other children, and they were crying. I wasn't crying, because I remember one of the nuns gave me a bun, and I think it was Mother Oliver, and that kept me quiet. But I sat in the same seat as Ursula, and as long as I was sitting beside her, I felt confident and secure. But then she was taken off to her class, and suddenly I was in with this crowd of small boys and girls, and I didn't know what, and I felt I had to jump up and run home. But I survived it, and but another fear I had was the nuns wouldn't allow you to go home through the grounds in the evening, and when school was over at the primary school, you had to go home Brook Street, and Brook Street was a dreadful place. It was like the Gorbals in Glasgow. It was terrible. Talmud Road or Railway Terrace was a palace compared to Brook Street, because you'd go by these houses that didn't seem to have doors, or maybe they had half doors, they were open, and they were dark inside, and you were always scared that there was somebody with really tatty clothes. It looked like they had never been washed, usually bent over, women without teeth, like old grannies. And they would look at you as though, and you'd swear that they were witches. They'd frighten the life out of you. But I had to go home Brook Street, and it just terrified me. So I would wait until the rest of the children had gone, and I would make a mad dash through the convent grounds on my own, hoping that I wouldn't run into a nun, because if you met a nun, the nun would say, "What are you doing here?" Because they were afraid you would walk on the grass. But for so many times I would just go through the convent grounds and come out at Dr. Cunningham's house there on James Street at the main entrance. But you were allowed to go to school that way. But what you would do is you had to report about 9:30, and you lined up at the gate, and then you marched down as a group down into the school, so that you wouldn't walk on the grass. However, coming home, it was just a free-for-all. But I detested going home Brook Street. I was afraid, deathly afraid of. There were some burned down houses there, and the people who lived in Brook Street, I was afraid of being attacked by them, and I just didn't like going home that way. And so that was one of the fears of going to school, coming home Brook. I don't know if any other boys did that, but then. That was just one or 2 years at the convent school, and then I went to the Brothers, and that was a whole lot easier, because you went up James Street, went down the side of the church, the Sacred Heart Church, into the playground, and it was a whole lot easier. But Brook Street just bothered the hell out of me, and there was a dark little passage between the old church and the bottom of the Brothers' ground, where there were laurel hedges, and I always felt sure that somebody was going to leap out at me and grab me or do something to me. And it was you rushed as hard as you could. Once you got to the bottom steps of the church and you were going up the steps, you're home and dry.
Do you remember who you were at school with, even in mixed infants, as you said, in Mother Oliver's class?
No. There was one in Mother Oliver's class. There was, I think his name was Maurice McGrath, and I don't. I think his name was Maurice McGrath, but and there was a girl that I sat beside. You know, the first time you really liked a girl. I remember bringing her a present from home. I don't know who the girl was, but I remember I had a little toy of some sort that I remember my mother asked me afterwards what I had done with it, and been embarrassed to say that I'd given it away because I couldn't explain why I'd given it to her. But another thing I remember, there was a statue in Mother Oliver's class, and the little lamp was not lit because Mother Oliver said there was no oil. And so I remember mentioning this at home, and my mother gave me a little bottle of oil in a whiskey bottle, a nagging bottle of paraffin to take up, and that was put in the lamp. It was lit in May or October, one of the devotion months. The reason I remember Morris McGrath was the bar of soap in his mouth. Morris was always talking when he shouldn't have been talking, and Mother Oliver made him sit with a bar of soap in his mouth, and I was never sure why he had a bar of soap in his mouth, but he sat for about 10 minutes with this thing in his mouth, and she said, "Now, do you want to talk again?" And he said, no, he didn't. And then I went home, I got a bar of soap and I put it in my mouth just to see what it was like, and I could see why he wouldn't want to talk again, because it was dreadful. But those are a few things that I remember. I talked in class one time, in Mother Oliver's class, but I didn't get the bar of soap. I was told to go and report to Mother Philomena's class. Now, in the old primary school, Convent Primary, there were 2 flights of stairs. There was a wooden flight of stairs and there was a concrete flight. And she said, go up the stairs and report to Mother Philomena that you were talking in class. And I came out, and I'd never been up these stairs. You'd look up, and because those were for the higher classes, and I didn't know whether to go up the concrete flight. So I went up a little bit and came down, went over to the other part of the school, I went up a few steps on the wooden staircase, and I came down again. And I was, because I didn't know what I should do, so I went back and just stood outside the classroom, and then Mother Oliver sent somebody out to get me. Maybe it was Morris McGrath, but he got me and brought me in and said he never went to Mother Philomena's. He's been standing outside the door all the time, and there's these fears. And another fear was being locked in the toilet. We had there were 2 toilets in a cloakroom, and I went to the toilet at the end of a class, and some other boy swung the door closed, and the little hasp stuck, and I couldn't get it down. And there I was. All the boys had gone home the children had gone, and I was locked in the toilet. And I was shouting, and no one heard me. But fortunate enough, the door was about a foot off the ground, and I rolled out onto the door. And then when I got up to the cloakroom, my coat was stolen. It was because if you didn't have a coat and there was one coat left, you had to make sure you got your coat, and things disappeared because some boys didn't have coats. And I remember my coat and going home without a coat. It was, so there were lots of little fears like that at the primary school, and then, but I would have to say the convent primary and going home Brook Street, there was, where there's a row of houses now up. You came up the back door of the convent, crossed the road, and then there was a temporary hut on the hillside, and I was up in that hut one time, and I think it was Trout McElroy, one of the McElroys. We were sitting, and the windows were open, and he threw a book out through the window, and he was sent out to bring the book back, and never came back to the class. And I thought that was a dreadful thing. It was dreadful. How could he not? Where did he go? But the memories of these situations were always there was a great deal of fear of going home, fear of the teacher, fear of having a bar of soap in your mouth, being sent to the principal, being locked, your coat being stolen, on dogs. If there was a dog on the around, fear of it being bitten by a dog. There wasn't any fear of being knocked down by a car because there weren't any cars. You could wander around the streets and you'd hardly see a vehicle. So,
was like that. Authority was always fear.
Oh, yes. When coming home from school one time from the common, the church had new concrete put out on the front of the church, and it was like small boys. You write your name in concrete, and I saw something that looking back now as a physician, I understand, but Dr. O'Doherty was a curate here. We never knew why we called them doctors because they didn't cure us of anything. But there were these doctors. Dr. O'Doherty, he always wore a brimmed hat and carried an umbrella. But he was a very stern man, very stern. I remember this boy. We all came like wild animals from the school up, and this concrete had been freshly laid, and this boy reached over and was either writing his name or putting his footprint on it. And Dr. O'Doherty came out of the church and grabbed him by the. He said, "What do you think you're doing, boy?" And I remember seeing the boy urinated. You know, he was peeing. There was pee running down his legs onto the ground. And I didn't know what the hell had happened. Why was he peeing? Had he been stabbed? Where was this water coming from? It was the fear of Dr. O'Doherty grabbing him by the scruff of the neck. And he let him go, and he went away like a rabbit. I think he was from the hill. Either you were from the hill or Campsie or Brook Street, or you were from the country. But these are the simple things that stick in your mind. So fear played an immense part in our lives. Fear of the unknown, fear of certain figures, fear of the police, for instance. Joe Cunningham had property up the Culmore Road, and so had the Slavens. And if you stood on the gate, old Peter Cunningham he would just go up and down on his bicycle. If he saw you standing on the gate, he'd shout, "I'll have the police after you." And my God, if you saw a policeman, policeman was coming to your house to take you away, that something was going to be done to you. So the figures of authority, the police, the people in landlords, I suppose, landowners, people who drove vehicles. I think the Cunninghams were a very important family, and old Peter and his property, and the Slavens, because they didn't like to see you running through their land. And we always had to, if we were ever on land, we had to be dodging around the hedge, watching to see if anyone was coming, because we knew we were doing the wrong thing. Walking along the railway line, my God, we'd be knocked. It was easier to be knocked down by a train than it was by a car. And being up on the railway line, my parents would shout, "Get off that railway line! You'll be killed by the train." And so that was although we lived by the station, if we went up to look at the railway, we used to put pennies on the line to flatten them out, or other objects, and then we'd go up to see what had happened to them. And my father would he would read the Riot Act if we were up on the railway line. And hell, we were only 100 yards, less than 100 yards, 20 yards from the railway line where we lived, but we just were not allowed to be there. We headed off to Queen's because Leo Sullivan had tutored us, had directed us that this was what we should do. Now, when we went to Queen's, we felt a sort of lost in a way, because we didn't have Leo Sullivan to tell us to do your homework or to be on top of things. And you went to a class or you didn't go to a class, and things were not taught. We weren't spoon-fed, and it was, we're in a class with maybe 100 people, and suddenly you felt very small. You wondered, who should I ask if I have a question? There was no one. If you went down to the teacher, the professor, he was off to another class, or you had a class in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and if you got behind, it was very difficult. And I felt my first semester from whatever it was, October until Christmas, it wasn't like being at school anymore. The intimate relationships you had with other boys, and coming home in the evening to your own house. Now I was staying with a landlady. It was the first time I'd been away from home. Unfortunately, I was, as Fabian and I stayed in the same place. We stayed on the Antrim Road, and we were away from the main university crowd. We went home at 5 after classes, didn't appear until the next morning. So things like ceilidhs or dances or that sort of thing we didn't do. So I don't remember much about the university in the evening. As far as drinking, I wasn't a drinker. They used to call them hops. There were dances on Saturday night. I usually go into the pictures on the Antrim Road. There were a couple of theatres there. And I would try to read, or I would come home. We used to come home a lot. Fabian had a motorcycle, and we would either go over the loch or under the loch to come home. We would alternate the trips. And but it was just a very strange experience, because I really didn't know what the university was. It was like an extension of of school.
Do you think that school prepare you in a way for that?
No. We were. I had no idea what was taught at the university or what the university was. I could barely spell university, I think. I knew it was in some place called Belfast, where I'd never been before. So there's, but you went because the other boys were going, not because you were embarrassed. What were you going to do if you didn't go? You'd have to work, and what were you going to work at? I didn't know what I was going to work at. I didn't want to go and work at my grandparents' farm, because I didn't like being out in the hay. Things got up my nose. I didn't like dirt on my hands. I was a softy, so to speak. My uncle used to tell me that, because I didn't like being around animals. The smell of them bothered me, and I was looking for something, a clean job. And what the teachers did was interested me, because it seemed to be, and Harry Tipping's work was a clean job, so to speak. But we were none of us were encouraged to be teachers. It was, you get to the university and study chemistry, and what did that do you? Well, you could become a research chemist, and at that time, it was early 50s. There was a lot of money being spent on research. From what I remember now, there was a lot of jobs with ICI, Imperial Chemical Industries. Court Halls was a big plant in Belfast, and so if you took a degree in science or chemistry, you were sure of a job. And I think that's
a job abroad.
A job. I suppose a job abroad. It was just, that's what we were told. A degree in chemistry, and you were set for life, so to speak.
Well, did you have at the back of your head, well, I'll come back to Omagh at some stage, and I will set up my stall in Omagh,
yes,
or I will live in Omagh?
No, I never thought about that. When I was a student in Belfast and coming up and down so frequently, I would say I was home once a week, once a month, and whether I came by train or came on the back of Fabian's motorcycle, it was hard to say. But you had there was a continuum with Omagh, but mostly when I would come home, it was to see my parents, and a little bit of a change from Belfast. Then when I became a graduate student, it was pretty much the same thing, another 3 years. And then when I finished that, you definitely had to look for a job, and looking for a job, then if you're in any sort of course, and I think whether you're an undergraduate or a graduate student, you see 4 years ahead of you, and you think, well, gee, I've got 4 years, there's a little goal here, I get a degree at the end of it. But if you're in a job, you wonder, well, gee, what do I do? There are no goals in a job. This is as far as I could see. And there were no exams, and I think exams from I was 9 or 10, and this 11+ thing really influenced me, as far as that you got something by passing the exam, and the 11+ really put that in my mind. I got the 11+ off to grammar school. You take junior certificate, and then you move on to the senior certificate. You get the senior certificate, you do advanced, then you go to the university. You pass your exams then each year, and you stay at the university, and you get a degree. And it was always exams, and this has been. It may be a something that I've been afflicted with. But I found this the same way when I studied medicine and went to the United States. For the licensing exam in the United States, you have to take a series of courses and pass an exam, which is very, very difficult. But I got it out of the way. Then for what's called certification in family practice, you take an exam and then you have to repeat that every 6 years. And so I took that last year for the 4th time, and it's you are glad when it's over. It's sort of you say to yourself, I don't have to take that for another 6 years. And exams have been, I would say, probably the most frightening thing that I've ever had to deal with. Because so much depended on it. Yeah, and I don't know about students now if they worry about doing well in exams, but you don't move along to the next step unless you've passed that exam. And if you don't pass that exam, you're next to useless. There's an embarrassment. You're an embarrassment to yourself and your parents. And that we were brought up with that, like, who failed 11 plus? Who failed at the university? Who didn't stay on to go on to 2nd year, 3rd year? There was, you couldn't look at yourself in the mirror, because if you came back to Omagh and didn't pass your exams, Mrs. Kennedy or Mrs. Myler or Mrs. McAleer or Mrs. Mains or Mrs. Gormley, all the people in the street would say, well, how are you doing? You couldn't very well say, well, gee, I failed all my exams and I'm a useless critter. And I don't know what I'm going to do. You always had to say that you passed your exams, which we did, but there was that an unseen social force to make you do well. Your parents expected it, because if you look back and you ask yourself, well, gee, what was the alternative? What was I going to do? And if you didn't do well to get on to the next stage in your life, then you knew that somebody was going to be criticising you, and I tended to be that sort of an individual who was, I tend to be influenced by what other people thought of me. Gee, he's bitten off more than he can chew. What's he doing up at the university? Sure, his parents never went to the university. What would they do? They were strangers. That was the other thing about my parents. They came from Fermanagh, and they lived in Omagh, and they were always known as strangers because they came from Fermanagh. And and I used to hear my parents talk about that, and so there was a certain fear grew up in you that your relatives and what other people thought about you was very important, and you had to always be bettering yourself, doing something better than your parents.
Well, that culture of, I suppose, being driven by exams,
yes,
and the fear of failure, is it more prevalent in the States, from what you can see from the overview?
Not now. No, from what I see in the high schools now, that there's this feeling of, well, man, life is here. Just let's drift along. Doesn't mean that much anymore. There's some students who are very conscientious of their what is expected of them, but I think there's a vast number that really don't care, and I don't know whether that's because of the family upbringing or not. But it seems even some of the best of families have students or sons and daughters that really don't apply themselves, because I think they've had it so good. Their parents have given them everything they want. They've had cars, the best of food, the best of clothing. Whereas when we were growing up, my parents were relatively poor, and you had this fear that, gee, do I want to live like this? Do I want to be, having just 3 meals a day? As a child, I remember my mother saying, she could hear the lid on the bread bin rattling in the scullery, and if you lifted it off, she'd say, "Get out of that bread bin, lad!" Until tea time, you didn't dare eat anything between meals, because maybe there wasn't enough to go around. But we had our fill, in the sense that we weren't starving, but we were disciplined. And I think the word discipline is what I think it's all about. You went to school on time. You had to do your homework. There were meals at a certain time. You went to mass. The boys went to confession one weekend, and the girls went the next weekend. You went to 10 o'clock mass because that was the children's mass. You didn't turn around if anything happened because Brother Hamill was walking up and down. And boy, if you looked around, he was there. What are you looking at, boy? What are you looking at? You'll be like Lot's wife. You'll be turned to stone or with salt. And so there was somebody watching you. There was somebody driving you all the time because I think the brothers realised, or the teachers realised, that there was a bit of there was some grey matter there, and if you could just cultivate it, whether you beat hell out of it with a leather strap, or whether you encouraged it by some other means, I don't know, but I think the leather strap was the simplest way to get her attention.
Do you reflect on the leather strap ever at all now?
I do, because I think that I have to admit that had that leather strap not had been used, or the threat of it, I think I would have drifted through, and I wouldn't have done half the things, because what we were learning really didn't interest me. There were two things. I like going into the chemistry lab and the physics lab and doing experiments. The pouring liquids and getting different colours and playing with wires and putting electricity through wires and heating things up and boiling water and lighting Bunsen burners and whatever. Those sorts of things. And Brother Ryan, with his, he used to show us how derivatives were generated. But I had a difficult time learning stuff like El Penseroso or L'Allegro. You know, who the hell was El Penseroso, and who was this guy L'Allegro, wherever he was, and Bunty Shannon and Harry Tipping trying to get us to memorise pages of this stuff. Shakespeare's plays. You know, I hadn't a clue what the way the sentences were put together, because I didn't understand the English and the appreciation for how it was put together, because at our age 11 it was going above our heads. But mixing things in labs, it was like cowboys and Indians. You were doing things that you could see, whereas the language didn't have the same meaning for me. Geography and maps and other talking about other countries, and Peter Passmore helped us with that. That was interesting in a way, because there were pictures in the books, but language was dreadfully boring. Latin and Irish, I didn't know what I was doing. Peter Passmore would walk up and down the class shouting, "Amo, amas, amat, amamas, amatus, aman," and I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. Amo, what the hell's amo? And Agricola was the farmer, and the farmer to me was a farmer. And who's this guy called Agricola? I couldn't. It wouldn't click for me. It was like, and I've had a difficult time with language since then. But science was something I enjoyed and learned.
What about the Latin base for the science? Does it exist?
There was so much poured on us at an early age. I think I was floundering, and maybe if we hadn't had so much to do, I might have done better. But as I said, the things that I certainly did not like language, and I didn't like Harry Tipping not because of Harry Tipping, but because of the subjects he taught, and it was his job. You know, he could see that we're reasonably. You know, if I did very well in mathematics and chemistry and physics, why the hell could I not do well in Irish and English? What was wrong with this guy? And I think he felt it was a lost cause trying to beat this stuff into me, and I couldn't understand what he was doing.
He thought there should be a correlation between their ability at one.
Exactly, and I didn't, and it didn't interest me at all. So, but as I said, looking back, I think I have to. The teachers were responsible for my moving on, and I have no regrets. Some boys said it was terrible to be beaten. I have no qualms about it. Anything I got, I deserved.
Well, the crime of the century. Did you consider it, or was it considered a major thing at the time when it happened?
I don't think so. It was just a spontaneous act. We knew where kept his leather in his desk. This was a new desk that had a lock on it, and I suppose he felt it was secure in the lock, in the lock desk. Normally he carried around in his case or in his jacket pocket. But we saw this new desk had been placed in the manual room, and where we used to gather at night, because if I go back a little bit, Leo Sullivan used to encourage us to do experiments after school in physics and chemistry, and we had the run of the school, so to speak, at that time. But when this new desk arrived and felt he would keep his leather in it, we thought, well, gee, it must be some way of getting it out. And so we looked at the desk, and we looked at the bottom, and we looked at the lock. We realised that we didn't want to damage the desk in any way, because if we damaged the desk, that would we were damaging property, and we had this strong sense of what was right and wrong. At least we thought we had. So the getting a key, that was out of the question, because had the key. But the more we looked at the desk, the more we realised that it was held together with screws, and it wasn't that old, but there was a light coating of chalk dust on it. So we got a large screwdriver that would fit the 4 screws. I think there were 4 screws on the top. The desk was a sloping type of desk with a lid that opened from a single lock. And then the part that retained it was the flat portion where the well would normally be, and where you rested your pens in a little groove, and that was held down to the rest of the desk with these 4 screws. And it was, I suppose it was made of pine, but we found it was very easy to remove the screws with a large screwdriver. You just put it in and turned it, and lo and behold, the screws came up, just like they were being invited up. We felt that there was no trouble with this. It was very easy to do. If the screws had been tight and we had marred them with the screwdriver, maybe we would have stopped. But anyway, one screw came out, and then the others, and we were on a roll. We've got to get the last 2 out. Got the screws out. I just lifted the top of the desk sufficiently to get a hand in there. I don't know whose hand went in, whether it was mine or not. But anyway, the leather was retrieved from the desk. The top was put back down again, and the screws repositioned, and the top of the desk dusted with chalk dust to fill the slots in the screws. And there wasn't a mark on the desk to indicate that any damage had been done. And then we were like piranha fish with the leather. I know had a knife and grabbed one end of it, and he slashed it a couple of times, like all the venom that he had built up against this leather. Although I don't think had as many strappings as I had. But anyway, the leather was slashed into several small pieces, and some of them were cut up into the shape of tiny little leathers, and we took some of this away with us. I don't know what happened to the piece I got, but it's long gone. And in fact, when it was all over, why I wrote the disclaimer, I'm not sure, but and looking back at what I have written, I'm not sure that I realised what I was doing at the time or why I was doing it, because I certainly wasn't the brightest of the lads in the class. Others could have written maybe a better note, but anyway, I penned what was written, and I remember putting it in the hole in the manual room wall. The manual room wall was covered with some sort of fiberboard, and it was always getting holes in it. We would throw bottles, milk bottles, and balls and other objects, and it was getting dented. And it was very easy just to drop this letter into the hole, and it would fall. It fell down between the wainscoting and the outside of the manual room, thinking that, hey, it's lost. This is posterity. You know, whoever finds this, who will it be? Will it, not in our time, because heck, the brothers' school was going to stand there for 1,000 years, and it was forgotten about. But I think the next day, I'm not sure whether it happened a Friday evening or a regular weekday, but. Anyway, the next day we were back at school. We were, I knew I was in fear and trepidation because I didn't know what to expect. But we were sitting waiting with bated breath to see come in, because we knew he was the only one who had a key of this desk. It was his desk, and he opened the desk, and there was a bit of look of confusion on his face, because, like, He searched his bag, and I think he sent another boy out to question some of the other teachers if they had borrowed his leather strap. But anyway, it seemed to. It died a natural death. There was no hubbub about it. We weren't brought together by Brother Ryan for an explanation, and I think just felt that the leather had been taken by another teacher and was lost because it was never brought up again. And I have no recollection of talking to any of the other boys about it until about 3 years ago, whenever the letter and the contents of the envelope were found, and it was brought to my attention by when I was visiting my mother one year, and that was, as I said, how many? 30 years, 40 years. You would have thought that woodworms would have gotten to it, or mice would have chewed it up, or that it would just have deteriorated. But it seemed to have stood the test of time. I think it's a real good reflection on the quality of paper that was produced in those days and the ink.
Well, was there a ringleader? Can you recollect?
No, I cannot recollect if there was a ringleader. I know that and I were the ones who removed the top of the desk, and reinforces that. But I have this vivid picture of the leather being held by someone at one end and the knife holder at the other, and just slashing through it in one slash of rage. Why it was done, I don't know. I think that maybe we felt it was the source of a lot of our trials and tribulations. We knew that it didn't make any difference, because another leather would be produced, because at one stage I think every teacher had one, so it was only a matter of going down to Walter Bradley's shop, and he would make another one. So it seemed that would be down for a new one. Who knows? Because these things were put together very readily with 3 or 4 strips of leather sewn together. But if there was a ringleader, it just doesn't ring a bell with me. But looking back, you wouldn't have expected any of us to do it. So it was the devil did it. The devil made us do it. We were just carried up, and I think maybe it reflects human nature in general, that you wouldn't. It's not the sort of thing you would do on your own. But when there's a group there, there's a tendency. There's a certain amount of bravado. You get encouragement from your friends that say, "Let's do this," and so before too long, you suddenly you're doing things that you wonder, "Gee, have I done the right thing?" And you go off and with a certain amount of remorse. Did we have remorse? Probably not. We had fear that we'd be found out, and what would happen when we did this. So we were very sure to make it perfectly clear that we wouldn't tell this to anyone, and we didn't tell it to anyone. It was never spoken about as long as I can remember. I don't think it was ever talked about.
Did you confess it?
No, I didn't. No, hell, I didn't. I was sure if you did that Father Byrne would go straight up to Brother Murphy and tell him what you boys. Confession was sort of, it was fine, but I always felt that if there was something really bad, it might go beyond the confession. No, we didn't. I no recollection of it. Was that? Did we consider it a sin? Somehow or other we managed to wipe that from our consciences because we felt that it was the right thing to have done at the time, and because we were all guilty of it, and we didn't do that much damage. It was only an old leather, and after all, he could get another one quite easily.
Well, what was it like actually to hold the disclaimer and to see it again today? I read it and I looked at the piece of paper, and for the life of me, could I remember where I wrote it? As far as, was I sitting down? Did I write it at the teacher's desk?
I was surprised that I had spelled most of the words correctly because I'm a pretty poor speller, and and I don't know whether I produced it myself or whether with the help of others it was produced and I actually wrote it, but it it seemed to it was fairly precise. It wasn't. It didn't. It covered everything that we did, and it didn't. It didn't go into too many details about what. I don't know whether I put the date on it or not.
I think it was the 23rd of February.
Well, then it would be dark, and then because I knew it, the room was dark. That's the light was on, but outside was quite dark, and it was after 5. Because we would stay at the school until about 6 before going home for our evening meal. But I have no. I just don't remember any of the details of the time. And had we not not recorded that, and had it not been discovered, I probably wouldn't have thought anything more about it.
Would Walter Maguire do it now?
Oh, I suppose. Sure, I think he would do it again. It's for the devilment. I think we all like to do something that brings a little bit of fear into us. And it was the next day they thought of what was going to happen, but we were sworn to secrecy that we weren't going to let each other down. And after all, how could anyone prove anything? There was no damage. We didn't break anything. The desk was as it was, and could have lost his leather anywhere. It's not, you know. We rationalised, at least in our minds, we rationalised because it wasn't like if you broke into a room, there was no signs of any forced entry. So we and I think that's how it died. It just the leather episode. Because nowhere in my memory did any of the teachers ask us where that leather was or what had happened. I think it was an embarrassment maybe to that maybe he dropped it someplace or because he could have done that in the corridor and some other boy picked it up. So it was not discussed anymore either by us or by any of the teachers.
So it wasn't a defining moment.
No, it gave us a little feeling of superiority over the teacher. We felt we had got one over them, and they never were able to figure out what had happened. And we would sort of lord that over him mentally. That you can strap us as much as you want, but we're better than you.
Oh, that was lovely.
As many's a gay night from dark till daylight I spend with people of high renown. But in all their grandeur and heaps to squander, my heart would wander for sweet Omagh town.